I just take a few minutes and talk COVID. So this is where we're at on the ETS, and I'm exclusively talking ETS today, although happy to answer any other questions. So at this point, in 10 of the 11 circuit courts of appeals, we've had challenges to the ETS filed. Part of that is a strategy going on. You wouldn't have thought that you'd see a challenge necessarily in some of the more liberal circuits, but as a strategy, some members of the business community who actually want the vaccine mandates to go through are also filing in those circuits, because what will happen, and it's supposed to happen today, is the cases should be consolidated into one, and there'll be a lottery to determine which circuit gets it. So I don't ultimately know that it matters which circuit gets it, because I do think this ends up with the Supreme Court, although it may depend, which circuit gets it will depend or will influence what the opinion looks like, and it may influence the exact issues that the Supreme Court considers. So kind of stay tuned, but where we're at right now is on Friday, this past Friday, you guys remember last week, I told you the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals had hit the pause button basically on the ETS. Well, now it's even more of a pause button. They've issued an order actually staying enforcement and implementation of the ETS. So everything is on hold for the moment. And like I said, this is going to go to a lottery. A circuit court's going to consider it. The Supreme Court's going to consider it. So there is no ETS right now, but I don't think as employers, as responsible employers, we can just say, oh, we're just going to throw all that stuff to the side. I think we need to sort of think about prepping as if this may go through, and what can we kind of do now to get our ducks in a row. So just to sort of go over some of the issues that are in the ETS, the first thing you have to figure out, obviously, is are you covered? And the idea is this is for large employers, 100 or more employees. When you think about how you count employees, I said this last week, I'll say it again, I've said it to pretty much every member I've talked to, just remember that the goal of the Biden administration is to get as many people vaccinated as possible. So they're going to want as many companies included in this large employer definition as possible. So assume that just about every employee needs to get counted. When you're counting to 100, you're including your fully remote workers. You're including every site you have. It's not just one site. You're including your part-time employees, but not your independent contractors. And if you have 2 or more separate but related entities, I mean, OSHA is basically saying, this is the quote, 2 or more related entities may be regarded as a single employer for these purposes if they handle safety matters as one company. That's not that helpful to some of the more white collar employers who don't spend a lot of time on safety. But I think one of the places we can look is a place like FMLA, where we count workers, and the test in FMLA to determine if separate but related entities should be counted as one for purposes of counting to 50 in the case of the FMLA. Do you have common management? Do you have an interrelation of business operations? Do you have centralized control of HR and labor relations? And what's the degree of common ownership and financial control? So if, again, it's not a perfect science, but chances are if you have companies that are largely managed as one, they have a lot of common control, they have a lot of common ownership, you have the same policies and procedures, all those things, chances are the government's going to see that as one entity for purposes of counting to 100. Now, even if people are included in that counting to 100, it doesn't mean that all of your employees are going to be affected by the provisions of the ETS. If you have people who don't report to a workplace where anyone else is present, they're not going to be covered by the ETS. You have folks who work exclusively from home, they never come into an office, they're not going to be covered. And same thing with folks who work exclusively outdoors, and that's really exclusively outdoors. So something to consider if you were thinking about bringing people back to the office, but you have folks who can do their work remotely 100%. Do you want to keep people home for a longer period of time while we see how all of this plays out? That's a possibility. So what does the ETS require you to do? I summarized my slides from this week, from last week, to cut it down because I knew I would not have nearly as much time. But if you want to, you can go see the slides on our website, meainfo.org, in the Coronavirus Resource Center. I have the complete slides from last week that'll give you a little bit more information. But the first thing to do, and I think you should do this anyway, no matter what happens to the ETS. You've probably been hearing me talk about this, since vaccines became a thing. let's find out who's vaccinated, okay? Under the ETS, there's a variety of acceptable proofs of vaccination status. Obviously, the gold standard is to get a copy of people's vaccination card. If someone has lost their card, you can get an attestation from them that says they've been vaccinated, but you also, part of that attestation has to be that they also lost their vaccination card and they don't have access to it. But you can see here the whole list of acceptable proofs under the current ETS. But I definitely think you should be thinking about finding out your vaccination status anyway, then you know what you're up against, right? And then also supporting vaccination by providing employees reasonable time off for vaccination and recovery. Again, if you can afford to do this, I think you should be doing this as well. Let's make it as easy as possible for people to get vaccinated. So what does that mean under the ETS? It's 4 hours of paid time above and beyond regular sick or PTO to go get each dose, and that includes the booster. And then reasonable time of paid sick leave to recover from side effects. You know, all through FFCRA, we were saying, what's a reasonable amount of time to recover? OSHA says it's 2 days. So again, can you give people paid time off to get the vaccine? Can you give them paid time off to recover from side effects from the vaccine? Again, something I think if you can as an employer do it because it'll increase vaccination in your workplace, even if this ETS ultimately doesn't go through. Then if the ETS goes through, you're going to need to ensure that each employee who's not fully vaccinated wears a face covering when they're indoors or when they're occupying a vehicle with another person, except in very limited circumstances. And we mostly know what those are: when you're eating and drinking, when you're completely alone in an office, those things. But you're going to need to think about masking in the workplace. And then you're going to need to think about your mandatory vaccine policy. If you're not going to do you want to do mandatory vaccines? If you don't, you're going to need to establish weekly testing and have people who are not vaccinated wear a face covering. So again, this is a philosophical decision to make. Part of it depends probably on how vaccinated is your workforce and how many of those people need to come into an office on a regular basis. So again, I think it really is really helpful to find out who's vaccinated, what percentage of your population is vaccinated, and then you can kind of go from there. But again, you're not going to, let me stop for a second. You can mandate vaccines now as an employer if you want to. All right. If you have a good, legitimate business purpose, you can mandate vaccines regardless of what goes on with this ETS, but you're not required to at this point. Like I said, ETS is on hold. So let's kind of wait and see what happens. So these are the important dates, but of course the legal challenges have to play out first. So my best guess is that these dates, assuming the ETS does ultimately go through in some form or another, my guess is that these dates get pushed back, but it's just something to be cognizant of, that this is what's out there. And also to know that the idea of an ETS is that it would only be in place for 6 months. And while OSHA works on something more permanent. But these are the sort of the ideas behind the current ETS. January 4th is your kind of your big deal date for the mandatory vaccination. December 6th, previously it said December 5th, but that's a Sunday, so it's now December 6th, is everything else. It's establishing your policies, determining vaccination status, and obviously things you should be doing anyway. You know, if people are testing positive, you want to know, right? You're taking people who are positive out of the workplace. You're doing contact tracing. You're ensuring that employees that are not fully vaccinated wear face coverings. And you're providing employees information about the ETS. You're not going to do that unless or until the ETS actually goes through. And obviously, if employers don't comply, assuming the ETS ultimately goes through, it could be pretty costly. There are significant penalties now under OSHA for not complying with an ETS. So it's something to think about. The potential downfall, and I know what everybody's weighing. We're weighing recruitment and retention. We're weighing that against, you know, what else might possibly happen. We're weighing health and safety of our employees, and now we're also weighing the compliance issues that could come if we do find OSHA on our doorstep and we're not complying with the ETS. Again, if it ultimately goes through, and this is a big question that we got last week. ETS does not require employers to pay for the cost of testing, but you might be required to pay for it under a collective bargaining agreement under state law. New Jersey and Pennsylvania do have state laws requiring employers to pay for medical testing. We sent those sites out to those laws in last week's email after the town hall. We can send those out again if anybody wants to double check those. But I think about 30 states have some sort of law that talks about either employers paying for medical testing if it's required by the employer, and give me a second to come back to that, or reimbursing for business expenses. And I know one of the pushbacks I've gotten from members is, well, if the testing is required by the federal government, I'm not really requiring the testing, so therefore does this law apply? It's hard to say. We're not really going to, one of the fun things about employment law is you don't always know exactly what a statute means until it gets challenged in court. So it could, and I think that ultimately will happen if all this comes down and some employers force employees to pay for the tests in states that have laws about that. Those will get challenged, and we will know, very helpfully in a year or two, what that really means when the courts go through all of that and interpret the statutes. So when you're weighing risk, you think about. And the other part of the risk too is if I force my employees to pay for testing, a lot of employees might walk out the door rather than pay for that testing. There's also a minimum wage issue there. You can't take an hourly employee down below minimum wage through any payroll deductions. So if you're doing payroll deductions from the pay of the test, you got to keep that in mind. And of course, if you are using testing as a reasonable accommodation to somebody who has a medical or religious reason for not getting vaccinated, you have to pay for the testing unless it's an undue hardship. And certainly if you have questions about undue hardship, happy to talk to members on the hotline or on through member legal services about that. All right, I saw some questions popping up in the chat. Kevin, is there anything that we can?
You've covered a lot of them, but I do think one of the ones that has come up a couple of times is there any stay or other update on the federal subcontractor rules?
So there are legal challenges to the federal contractor rules. One of the things that did happen is they pushed back the deadline for your employees to be vaccinated. It's now January 18th. But no, there's no stay on that as of right now. Okay. There's also been a challenge in the healthcare arena as well, so stay tuned.
All right, and that does apply. There's no 100 employee limit for subcontractors. That's any subcontractor. All right.
Yeah, there's a different analysis as far as whether you're a contractor or a subcontractor. Yep.
Okay. And someone just in terms of the time off for vaccination, if somebody has regular PTO, do they use that first, or is it in addition to regular PTO?
So the 4 hours to get vaccinated, you have to give that above and beyond any regular PTO. For the time to recover, you can have employees use PTO if they have it, but if they don't have it, you got to give it to them. So at this time in the year when a lot of employees may not have PTO left, you might be giving it to them.
Okay, and someone did ask if we could include the link to the New Jersey site because the laws. I think we did PA last week, but
yeah, I have the sites to the New Jersey and the Pennsylvania law were in last week's email, and we'll send them out again.
Perfect. All right. Well, a lot going on. We'll obviously keep a very close eye on all the court cases because that seems to be the thing kind of at the forefront at this point. We hope to see you all tomorrow for the Great Sansdemic, and we hope you all have a very thankful Thanksgiving and with family, and please enjoy your time. There's one question just came in. Can you expand on subcontractor compliance? My understanding is that not all subcontractors are covered employees.
Yeah, I mean, you need to do an analysis as to whether you're a covered subcontractor. If you want to reach out to Hotline, we can talk to you more about that.
Yeah, and we did not say that it applies to boosters. Boosters are not covered by the ETS rule at this point. It's the primary vaccinations, my understanding.
Correct. Yep.
Yep. All right. Have a great day, everybody. Thanks. Thanks, Amy.
All right. Thanks.